Ranger's Apprentice, Book 1, The Ruins of Gorlan, by John Flanagan. Chapter 27. The three companions spent a sleepless night in the hunting cries of the Kalkara dwindled in the north. When they first heard the sounds, Gillen had moved to saddle Blaze, the bay horse, snorting nervously at the fearsome howling of the two beasts. Halt, however, gestured him to stop. "I'm not going after those things in the dark," he said briefly. "We'll wait till first light, then look for their tracks." The tracks were easy enough to find, as the Kalkara obviously made no attempt to conceal their passing. The long grass had been crossed by the two heavy bodies, leaving a clear trail pointing east-northeast. Halt found the trail left by the first of the two monsters. Then a few minutes later Gillen found the second, about a quarter kilometer to the left and traveling parallel, close enough to provide support in case of an attack, but distant enough to avoid any trap set for its brother. Halt considered the situation for a few moments, then came to a decision. "You stay with the second one," he told Gillen. "Will and I will follow this one. You want to make sure they both keep heading in the same direction. I don't want one of them doubling back to come behind us." You think they know where we are?" Will asked, working hard to keep his voice sounding steady and disinterested. "They could. There's been time for the plainsmen we saw to have warned them. Or maybe it's just a coincidence, they're heading out on their next mission." He glanced at the trail of crossed grass, moving irrevocably in one constant direction. "They certainly seem to have a purpose." He turned to Gillen again. "In any event, keep your eyes peeled and pay close attention to Blaze. The horses will sense these beasts before we will. We don't want to run into an ambush." Gillen nodded and swung away to return to the second trail. At a hand signal from Halt, the three rangers began riding forward, following the direction the Kalkara had taken. "I'll watch the trail. You keep an eye on Gillen just in case," Halt told Will. Will turned his attention to the tall ranger, some 200 meters away, and keeping pace with them. Blaze was only visible from the shoulders up, and his lower half masked by the long grass. From time to time, undulations in the intervening ground took both rider and horse out of sight, and the first time this happened, Will reacted with a cry of alarm, as Gillen simply seemed to disappear into the ground. Halt turned quickly, an arrow already at half draw, but at that moment Gillen and Blaze reappeared, seemingly unconscious of the moment of panic they caused. "Sorry," Will muttered, annoyed he'd allowed his nerves to get the better of him. Halt regarded him shrewdly. "That's all right. I'd rather you let me know any time you think that there's a problem." Halt knew only too well that having called a false alarm once, Will might be reluctant to react next time, and that could be fatal for all of them. "Tell me every time you lose sight of Gillen, and tell me when he reappears," he said. Will nodded, understanding his teacher's reasoning. And so they rode on, the keening cry of the flute swelling the ears again as they approached the stone circle. This time they would pass much closer, Will realized, as the Kalkara seemed to be heading straight for the site. As they rode, their passage was marked by intermittent reports from Will. "He's gone. Still gone. Alright, I see him again." The dips and rises in the ground were virtually invisible under the waving cover of tall grass. In fact, Will was never really sure whether it was Gillen passing through a depression or he and Halt. Often it was a combination. There was one bad time Gillen and Blaze sank from sight and didn't reappear within the customary few seconds. "I can't see him," Will reported. Then, "Still gone? Still gone? No sign of him?" His voice began to rise in pitch as the tension grew with him. No sign of them? Still no sign of them?" Halt brought Avalon to a stop, his bow ready once again, his eyes searching the ground to their left as they waited for Gillen to reappear. He'd go a piercing whistle, 3 ascending notes. There was a pause, then an answering whistle, this time the same 3 notes in descending order. They came clearly to them. Will heaved a sigh of relief. At just that moment, Gillen reappeared, large as life. He faced them and made a large gesture with both arms raised, and an obvious question. "What's the problem?" Halt made a negative gesture, and they moved on. As they approached the stone flutes, Halt became more and more watchful. The Kalkara that he and Will were trailing was heading straight towards the circle. He reined in Avalon and shaded his eyes, studying the dismal grey rocks, intently looking for movement or any sign that the Kalkara might be lying in wait to ambush them. "It's the only decent cover for miles," he said. "Let's not take the chance that the damn thing could be lurking there waiting for us. We'll go a little careful, I think." He signaled for Gillen to join them and explain the situation. Then they split up to form a wide perimeter around the stones, riding in slowly from 3 different directions, taking their horses for any possible sign of reaction as they came closer. But the sign was empty, although close up the jangling moan of the wind through the flute holes was close to unbearable. Halt chewed his lip reflectively, staring out across the sea of grass as the 2 undeviating trails left by the Kalkara. "This is just taking us too long. As long as we can see their trails for a couple of 100 meters ahead, we'll move faster. Slow down when you come to a rise any time when the trail isn't visible for more than 50 meters. Gillen nodded his understanding and resumed his wide position. They urged their horses on now in a canter, the easy lope of the ranger horse that would eat the kilometers ahead of them. Will maintained his watch on Gillen, and whenever the visible trail diminished, either Halt or Gillen would whistle and they would slow to a walk until the ground opened up again before them. As night fell, they camped once again. Halt still refused to follow the 2 killers in the dark, even though the moon meant their trail would easily be visible. Too easy for them to double back in the dark. I want plenty of warning when they finally come at us. "You think they will?" asked Will, noticing that Halt had said when, not if. The ranger smiled reassuringly at his young pupil. "Always assume that the enemy knows there and he will attack you. That way you tend to avoid unpleasant surprises." He smiled grimly to reassure the boy. "It can still be unpleasant, but it's not a surprise." In the morning they resumed the trail once more, moving at the same brisk pace, slowing only when they had no clear sight of the lie of the land ahead of them. By early afternoon they reached the edge of the plain and rode once again into the wooded country to the north of the mountains of Rain and Night. Here they found the 2 Kalkara had joined company, no longer keeping the wide separation they had maintained in the open ground of the plain. But their chosen path remained the same, east of northeast. The 3 rangers followed this course for another hour before Halt reined in Apallot and signaled the others to dismount for a conference. They grouped around a map of the kingdom that he unrolled out in the grass, using arrows as weight to stop the edges from re-rolling. "Judging from their tracks, we've made up some time on them, but there's still a good half a day ahead of us. Now this is the direction they're following." He took another arrow and laid it on the map, orientating it so that it pointed to the direction the Kalkara had been following for the past 2 days and nights. "As you can see, if they keep going this direction, there are only 2 places of significance that they could be heading for. Here, the Gorlan ruins, or further north, Castle Audible itself." Gillen drew a breath in sharply. "Castle Audible? You don't think they dare try for King Duncan?" Halt looked at him and shook his head. "I simply don't know. We don't know nearly enough about these beasts, and half of what we think we know is probably myth and legend. But you got to admit, it would be a bold stroke, a master stroke, and Morgrath has never been averse to that sort of thing." He let the others digest the thought for a moment, then traced a thin line from current position to the northwest. "Now I've been thinking. Look, here's Castle Redmond, perhaps a day's ride away, and then another day to here." From Redmond he traced the line northeast to the Gorlan ruins marked on the map. One person, riding hard and using 2 horses, could make it in less than a day to Redmond, and then lead the Baron and Sir Rodney here to the ruins. If the Kalkara keep moving at the pace they are, we might just be able to intercept them there. It'll be close, but it's possible. And with 2 warriors like Arald and Rodney on hand, we'll stand a far better chance of stopping the damn things once and for all. "One moment, Halt," Gillen interrupted. "You said 1 person and 2 horses." Halt met Gillen's gaze with his own. He could see that the young ranger had already divined he had in mind. "That's right, Gillen. And the lightest one among us will travel fastest. I want you to turn Blaze over to Will. If he alternates between Tuck and your horse, he can do it in the time." He saw the reluctance on Gillen's face and understood it perfectly. No ranger would like the idea of handing his horse over to someone else, even another ranger, but at the time Gillen understood the logic behind the suggestion. Halt waited for the younger man to break the silence. Will watched the two of them, eyes wide with alarm at the thought of a responsibility that was about to be loaded onto him. Finally, reluctantly, Gillen broke the silence. I suppose it makes sense. So what do you want me to do? Follow behind me on foot, Halt said briskly, rolling the chart up and replacing it in his saddlebag. If you can get hold of a horse anywhere, do so and catch up with me. Otherwise, we'll rendezvous at Gorlan. If we miss the Kalkara there, we can wait for you. With Blaze. I'll keep following the Kalkara until you all catch up with me. Gillen nodded his acquiescence, and Halt felt a surge of fondness for him as he did. Once Gillen saw the sense of his proposal, he wasn't the kind to raise arguments or objections. He did say rather ruefully, I thought you said my sword might come in handy. I did, but this gives me a chance to bring in 2 fully armored knights with axes and lances, and you know that's the best way to fight them. True, said Gillen then, taking Blaze's bridle. He knotted the reins together and threw them over the bay's neck. You may as well start out on Took. That will give Blaze a chance to rest. He'll follow behind you without a lead rein, and so will Took when you're riding Blaze. Tie the reins up like this on Took's neck so they don't dangle down and snag anything, said Gillen to Will. He began to turn back to Halt, then remembered something. Oh yes, before you mount him the first time, remember to say brown eyes. Brown eyes? Will repeated, and Gillen couldn't help grinning. Not to me, to the horse. It was an old ranger joke, and they all smiled. Then Halt brought them back to the business at hand. Well, you're confident you can find your way to Redmond? Will nodded. He touched the pocket where he kept his own copy of the chart, and glanced in the sun for direction. Northwest, he said tightly, indicating the direction he had chosen. Halt nodded satisfied. You'll strike the Salmon River before dusk. That'll give you a good reference point, and the main highway is just a little way west of the river. Keep to a steady canter all the way. Don't try to race the horses. You'll just tire them out, and that way you'll be slow in the long run. Travel safely now. Halt swung up into Abelard's saddle, and Will mounted Tuck. Gillen pointed to Will and spoke in Blaze's ear. Follow, Blaze. Follow. The bay horse, intelligent as all ranger horses were, tossed its head as if in acknowledgement of the order. Before they parted, Will had one more question that had been bothering. Halt, he said. The Gorlan ruins. What exactly are they? It's ironic, isn't it? Halt replied. They're the ruins of Castle Gorlan, Morgara's former fiefdom. Chapter 28. The ride to Castle Redmond soon settled into a blur of weariness. The 2 horses maintained the steady slope for which they had been bred. The temptation, of course, was to urge Tuck into a wild gallop with Blaze following behind. But Will knew that such a course would be self-defeating. He was moving at the horse's best speed. As old Bob, the horse trainer, had told him, ranger horses could maintain a canter all day without tiring. It was a different matter for the rider, added to the physical effort of moving constantly to the rhythm of whichever horse he was riding, and the 2 had distinctly different gaits due to their difference in size, was the equally debilitating mental strain. What if Halt were wrong? What if the Kalkara had suddenly veered to the west and were heading now on course that would intercept his? What if he made some terrible mistake and failed to reach Redmond in time? That last fear, the fear of self-doubt, was the hardest one to deal with. In spite of the hard training he had undergone over the past months, he was still little more than a boy. What was more, he had always had Halt's judgment and experience to rely on in the past. Now he was alone, and he knew how much depended on his ability to carry out the task he had set. The thoughts, the doubts, the fears crowded his tired mind, tumbling over each other, adjusting for position. The Salmon River came and went beneath the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. He paused to water the horses briefly at the water bridge, then once on the King Highway he made excellent time, with only short halts at regular intervals to change his mount. The day's shadows lengthened, and the trees overhanging the road grew dark and menacing. Each noise from the darkening trees, each vaguely seen movement in the shadows, brought his heart to a mouth with a lurch. Here an owl hooted, and he stooped to fasten its claws around an unwary mouse. There a badger prowled, hunting its prey like a grey shadow in the undergrowth of the forest. With each movement and noise, Will's imagination worked overtime. He began to see great black figures, much as he imagined a Kalkara would look, in every patch of shadow, in every dark clump of bushes that stirred with the light breeze. Reason told him that there was almost no chance that the Kalkara would be seeking him out. Imagination and fear replied that they were abroad somewhere, and who was to say they weren't close by? Imagination won, and fear won too, until the long fearful night passed, until the low light of dawn found a very figure hunched in the saddle of a sturdy barrel-chested horse that drove steadily onwards to the northwest. Dozing in the saddle, Will snapped awake with a start, feeling the first warmth of the sun rays upon him. Gently he reined Tug in, and the little horse stood, head down, sides heaving. Will realized he had been riding far longer than he should have been, his fear having driven him to keep Tug running through the darkness, long after he should have rested him. He dismounted stiffly, aching in every joint, and paused to rub the horse's soft nose affectionately. "I'm sorry, boy," he said, Tug reacting to the touch and the voice that he knew so well. Tossed his head and shook his shaggy mane. If Will had asked it, he would have continued uncomplaining until he dropped. Will looked around. The cheerful light of early morning had dispelled all the dark fears of the night before. Now he felt slightly foolish as he remembered those moments of choking panic. Stiffly he dismounted, then loosened the girth straps on the saddle. He gave his horse 10 minutes respite until Tug's breathing seemed to settle and his sides ceased heaving. Then, marveling at the recuperative powers and endurance of the Ranger horse breed, he tightened the girth on Blaze's saddle and swung astride, the bay groaning softly as he did so. Ranger horses might recover quickly. Ranger apprentices took a little longer. It was late morning when Castle Redmond finally came in sight. Will was riding Tug again, the small horse seemingly none the worse for the hard night he had put in. As they crested the low row of the hills that the green valley of Arald's barony stretched out before them. Exhausted, Will stopped for a few seconds, leaning tiredly on the pommel. They had come so far, so quickly. He looked with relief on the familiar sight of the castle, and the tidy little village that nestled contentedly in its shadow. Smoke was rising from chimneys. Farmers were walking slowly home from the fields for their midday meal. The castle itself stood solid and reassuring in its bulk at the crest of the hill. "It all looks so normal," Will said to his horse. Somehow, he realized, he'd been expecting to find things changed. The kingdom was about to go to war again for the first time in 15 years, but here life went on as normal. Then, realizing he was wasting time, he urged Tug forward until he was stretched out in a gallop, both boy and horse eager to finish this final leg of their journey. People looked up in surprise as the rapid passing of the small green and grey-clad figure hunched low over the neck of the dusty horse with a larger bay horse following behind. One or two of the villagers recognized Will and called a greeting, but their words were lost in the rattle of hoofs. The rattle turned to an echoing drumming as they swept across the lower drawbridge into the foreyard of the castle itself. Then the drumming became an urgent clattering in the cobblestones of the yard. Will drew back lightly on the reins, and Tug slid to a halt by the entrance to Baron Errol's tower. The 2 men-at-arms on duty there, surprised by his sudden appearance and breakneck pace, stepped forward and barred his path with their crossed pikes. "Just a moment, you," said one of them, a corporal. "Where do you think you're off to in such a clatter and a rush?" Will opened his mouth to reply, but before the words could form, an angry voice boomed from behind them. "What the hell do you think you're doing, you idiot? Don't you recognize a king's ranger when you see one?" It was Sir Rodney, striding across the courtyard in his way to see the Baron. The 2 sentries stiffened to attention as Will turned gratefully to the battlemaster. "Sir Rodney," he said, "I have an urgent message from Halt for Lord Arald and yourself." As Halt had observed to Will after the boar hunt, the battlemaster was a shrewd man. He took in Will's disheveled clothing, the dusty horses, standing heads, drooping tightly, and realized this was no time for a lot of foolish questions. He jerked a thumb at the doorway. "Best come in and tell us then." He turned to the sentries. "Have these horses looked after, feed and water them?" "Not too much of either, please, Sir Rodney," Will said quickly. "Just a small amount of grain and water, and maybe you could have them rubbed down. I'll be needing them again soon." Rodney's eyebrows rose at that. Will and the horses looked as if they could use a long rest. "Something must be urgent," he said, adding to the corporal, See to the horses then, and have food brought to Baron Errol's study, and a jug of cold milk. The two knights whistled in astonishment as Will told them the news. Word had already come that Morgraf was mustering his army, and the Baron had sent out messengers to assemble his own troops, both knights and men-at-arms. But the news of the Kalkara was something else entirely. No hint of that had reached Castle Redmond. You say Halt thinks they may be going after the king? Baron Arald asked, as Will finished speaking. Will nodded, then hesitated before added, Yes, my lord, but I think there's another possibility. He was loath to go further, but the Baron gestured for him to continue, and he finally gave voice to a suspicion that had been building inside him, through the long night and day. Sir, I think maybe there's a chance that they're after Halt himself. Once his suspicion was voiced and the fear was out in the open to be examined and evaluated, he felt the better for it. Somewhat to his surprise, Baron Arald didn't dismiss the idea. He stroked his beard thoughtfully as he digested the words. Go on, he said, wanting to hear Will's reasoning. It's just that Halt felt Morgraf might be looking for revenge, looking to punish those who fought him last time. And I thought probably Halt did him the most harm of all, didn't he? That's true enough, said Rodney. And I thought maybe the Kalkara knew we were following them. The plainsmen had plenty of time to find them and tell them. And maybe they were leading Halt on until they found a place for an ambush. So while he thinks he's hunting them, he's actually the one being hunted. And the Gorlan ruins would be an ideal place for it, Halt agreed. In the tumble of rocks they could be on him before he had a chance to use that longbow of his. Well, Rodney, there's no time to waste. You and I will go, half armor, I think. We'll move faster that way. Lances, axes, and broadswords. We'll take 2 horses each. We'll follow Will's example there. We'll leave in an hour. Have Carol gather another 10 knights and follow us as soon as he can. Yes, my lord, the battlemaster replied. Baron Errol turned back to Will. You've done a good job, Will. We'll take care of this for now. As for you, you look as if you could use 8 hours of solid sleep. Verily, aching in every muscle and joint, Will drew himself erect. I'd like to come with you, my lord, he said. He sensed that the Baron was about to disagree and added hurriedly, Sir, none of us knows what's going to happen, and Gillen is out there somewhere, on foot. Besides, he hesitated. Go on, the Baron said quietly, and when the boy looked up, Harold saw the steel in his eyes. Halt is my master, sir, and he's in danger. My place is with him. The Baron assessed him shrewdly, then came to a decision. Very well, but at least you can't get an hour's of rest. There's a cot in the annex over there. He indicated a curtained-off section of the study. Why don't you use it? Yes, sir, said Will gratefully. His eyes felt as if he had handfuls of sand rubbed into them. He had never been happier to obey an order in his life. Chapter 29. Through that long afternoon, Will felt as he had lived his entire life in the saddle, his only respite being the hourly changes from one horse to another. If Breeze paused to dismount, loosen the girth straps of the horse he had been riding, tighten those on the horse which had been following, then he would remount and ride on. Again and again he marveled at the amazing endurance shown by Tuck and Blaze as they maintained their steady canter. He even had to rein them in a little, to keep pace with the battle horses ridden by the 2 knights. Big, powerful, and trained for war as they might be, they couldn't match the constant pace of the ranger horses, in spite of the fact that they were fresh from the small party had left Castle Redmond. They rode without speaking. There was no time for idle talk, and even if there had been, it would have been difficult to hear one another above the drumming thunder of the 4 heavy battle horses, the lighter rattle of Tuck and Blaze's hooves, and the constant clank of equipment and weapons that accompanied them as they rode. Both men carried long war lances, hard ash poles, more than 3 meters in length, tipped with heavy iron point. In addition, each had a broadsword strapped to their saddles, huge, 2-handed weapons that dwarfed the swords they normally wore in their day-to-day use. And Rodney had a heavy battle axe slung at the rear right pommel of his saddle. It was the lances on which they would place greatest trust, however. They would keep the Kalkara at a distance, and so reduce the chance of the knights might be frozen by the terrifying stare of the 2 beasts. Apparently the hypnotic graze was only effective at close quarters. If a man couldn't see the eyes clearly, there was little chance of paralyzing him with their gaze. The sun was dropping fast behind them, throwing their shadows out before them. long and distorted by the low-angle light. Arald glanced over his shoulder at the sun's position and called to Will. "How long before dusk, Will?" Will turned in his saddle and frowned at the descending ball of light before answering. "Less than an hour, my lord." The Baron shook his head doubtfully. "It'll be a close run to get there before full dark, then." He urged his battling horse onward, increasing speed a little. Took and Blaze matched the increase without effort. None of them wanted to be hunting the Kalkara in the dark. The hour's rest at the castle had done wonders for Will, but it seemed that it had happened in another lifetime now. He thought over the cursory briefing that Arald had given as they mounted to leave Redmond. If they found the Kalkara at the Gorlan ruins, Will was to hold back while the Baron and Sir Rodney charged the two monsters. There were no complex tactics involved, just a headlong charge that might take the two killers by surprise. If Halt's there, I'm sure he'll take a hand too. But I want you well back out of harm's way, Will. That bow of yours won't make any impression on a Kalkara." "Yes, sir," Will had said. He had no intention of getting close to the Kalkara. He was more than content to leaving the things to the two knights, protected by their shields, helmets, and half-armor of chainmail shirts and leggings. However, Arald's next words quickly dispelled any overconfidence he might have had in their ability to deal with the beasts. "If the damn things get the better of us, they'll want you to ride for more help. Carol and the others will be somewhere behind us. Find them, then go after the Kalkara with them. Track those beasts down and kill them." Will had said nothing to that. The fact that Arald was contemplated failure when he and Rodney were the two foremost knights within a 200-kilometer radius spoke volumes of his concern about the Kalkara. For the first time, Will realized that, in his contest, the odds were heavily against them. The sun was trembling in the brink of the world, the shadows at their longest, and they still had several kilometers to go. Baron Arald raised a hand and brought the party to a stop. He glanced at Rodney and jerked a thumb at the bundle of pitch-soaked torches each man carried behind his saddle. "Torches, Rodney," he said briefly. The battlemaster demurred for a moment. "Are you sure, my lord? They'll give away our position if the Kalkara are watching." Arald shrugged. "They'll hear us coming anyways, and among the trees we'll move too slowly without the light. Let's take the chance." He was already striking his flint and steel together, igniting a spark that set a small pile of tinder smoking, then flaring into flame. He held onto the torch in the flame, and the thick, sticky pine pitch with it was impregnated suddenly caught and burst into yellow flame. Rodney leaned towards him with another torch and lit it in the Baron's flame. And holding the torches high, their lances held in place by leather thongs looped around their right wrists. They resumed their gallop, thundering into darkness beneath the trees. As they finally left the broad road they had been following since noon, it was not 10 minutes before they heard the screaming. It was an unearthly sound that twisted the stomachs into knots of fear and turned the blood cold. Involuntarily, the Baron and Sir Rodney reined as they heard it. Their horses plunged wildly against the reins. It came from straight ahead of them and rose and fell, until the night air quaked with the horror of it. "Good God in heaven! What was that?" the Baron exclaimed. His face was ashen as the hellish sound soared through the night toward them, to be answered immediately by another, identical howl. But Will had heard the terrible noise before. He felt the blood leave his face now as he realized his fears were being proven correct. "It's the Kalkara," he said. "They're hunting." And he knew there was only one person out there that they could be after. They turned back and were hunting Halt. "Look, my Halt," Rodney said, pointing to the rapidly darkening night sky. Through a break in the tree cover they saw it, a sudden flare of light reflecting in the sky, evidence of a fire in the near distance. That's Halt," the Baron said. "Bound to be, and he'll need help." He rammed his spurs into the tired battle horse's flanks, urging the beast forward into the lumbering gallop, the torch in his hand streaming flame and sparks behind him as Sir Rodney and Will galloped in his tracks. It was an eerie sensation following those flame-spitting torches through the trees, the elongated tongues of flame blowing back behind the two riders, casting weird and terrifying shadows among the trees, while ahead of them, the glow of the large fire, presumably lit by Halt, grew stronger and nearer with each stride. They broke out of the trees with virtually no warning, and before them was the scene of nightmares. There was a short space of open grass, then the ground beyond was a litter of tumbled rocks and boulders, Giant pieces of masonry, still held together by mortar, lay scattered on their sides and edges, sometimes half buried in the soft grassy earth. The ruined walls of Castle Gorlan surrounding the scene, on three sides, nowhere rising to more than 5 meters in height, destroyed and cast down by a vengeful kingdom after Morgarath had been driven out to his keep and back into the mountains of rains and night. The resulting chaos of rocks and sections of tumbled wall was like the playground of a giant child, scattered in all directions, piled carelessly on top of one another, leaving virtually no clear ground at all. The whole scene was illuminated by the leaping, twisting flames of a bonfire some 40 meters in front of them, and beside it a horrific figure crouched, screaming hatred and fury, plucking uselessly at the mortal wound in his chest that had finally brought it down. Over 2.5 meters tall, with shaggy, matted scale-like hair covering its entire body, the Kalkara had long talon-clad arms that reached to beneath its knees. Relatively short, powerful hind legs gave it the ability to cover the ground at a deceptive speed, in a series of leaps and bounds. All of this the three riders took in as they emerged from the trees, but what they noticed most was the face, savage and ape-like, with huge yellowed canine teeth and red, glowing eyes, filled with hatred and blind desire to kill. The face turned toward them now, and the beast screamed and challenged, tried to rise, and stumbled back into a half-crouch again. What's wrong with it? Rodney asked, reining in his horse. Will pointed to a cluster of arrows that protruded from its chest. There must have been 8 of them, all placed within a hand's breadth of each another. Look at the arrows! Halt, with his uncanny ability to aim and fire in a blur of movements, must have sent a volley of arrows, one after another, to smash into the armor-like matted hair, each one widening a gap in the monster's defense until the final arrow had penetrated deep into its flesh. Its black blood ran in sheets down its torso, and again it screamed its hatred at them. Rodney, yelled Baron Arald, with me, now! Dropping the lead rein to his spare horse, he touched the flaming torch to one side, crouched his lance, and charged. Rodney was half a second behind him, the 2 battle horses thundering across the open space. The Kalkara, its lifeblood saturating the ground at its feet, rose to meet them in time to take the 2 lances points one after another in the chest. It was all but dead. Even so, the weight and strength of the monster checked the onward rush of the battle horses. They reared back on their haunches, as both knights leaned forward in the stirrups to drive the lances points home. The sharp iron penetrated, smashing through the matted hair. This force of the charge drove the Kalkara from its feet and hurled it backwards into the flames of the fire behind it. For an instant nothing happened. Then there was a blinding flash and a pillar of red flame that reached 10 meters into the night, and quite simply, the Kalkara disappeared. The 2 battle horses reared in terror, Rodney and the Baron only just managing to retain their seats. They backed away from the fire. There was a terrible reek of charred hair and flesh filling the air. Vaguely, Will remembered Halt discussing the way to deal with the Kalkara. He said that they were rumored to be particularly susceptible to fire. Some rumor, he thought, heavily. Trotting took forward to join the 2 knives. Rodney was rubbing his eyes, still dazzled by the enormous flash. What the devil caused that? He asked. The Baron gingerly retrieved his lance from the fire. The wood was charred, and the point blackened. It must be the waxy substance that matted their hair together into that hard shell, he replied, in a wondering tone of voice. It must be highly flammable. Well, whatever it was, we did it, Rodney replied, a note of satisfaction in his voice. The Baron shook his head. Halt did it, he corrected his battlemaster. We merely finished him off. Rodney nodded, accepting the correction. The Baron glanced at the fire, still pouring a torrent of sparks into the air, but setting back now from the huge explosion of red flame. He must have lit his fire when he sensed they were circling back in on him. It lit up the area so hard he had light to shoot by. He shot all right. Those arrows must have all struck within a few square centimeters. They looked around, searching for some sign of the ranger. Then, below the ruined walls of the castle, Will caught sight of a familiar object. He dismounted, ran to retrieve it, and his heart sank as he picked up Halt's powerful longbow, smashed and splintered into pieces. "He must have fired from over here," he said, indicating the point below the ruined wall where he had found the bow. They looked up, imagining the scene, trying to recreate it. The Baron took Shadow Weapon from Will as he remounted Tuck, and the second Kalkara reached him as he killed its brother. The question is, where is Halt now, and where's the other Kalkara? That was when they heard the screaming starting again.